welcome to the Singapore Management University podcast series, which features the latest insights and perspectives from our faculty. Past research has well documented how workplace peer helping is essential to the success of organizations. In difficult economic periods, such helping becomes all the more critical for companies to remain effective. However, a research by SMU Associate Professor of Organizational Behavior and Human Resources, Marco Patessa, and his co-author, Nina Sarola from INSEAD, showed that the extent to which people are willing to help at work changes in response to prevailing macroeconomic conditions. They found that as the economic outlook darkens, so do employees' attitudes towards one another. This behavior was due to what they termed as zero-sum construal of success, a view that success is a finite resource, so one person's success requires someone else to fail. In this podcast, Associate Professor Patessa discusses this research, which has been published in the Academy of Management Journal, and highlights how managers can apply these insights in their businesses and what they can do to strengthen workforce cohesion, especially during tough economic times. Professor Patessa, please share with us what your research interests are and what inspires you to focus on your chosen area.
I study sources of economic disadvantage and harm at work. So my research looks at why people who are socially or economically disadvantaged, why they're treated by others in ways that perpetuates their disadvantage, or why they would engage in kinds of behaviors that are self-destructive economically. And in that way, the global motivation behind my research is to find ways in which organizations can help people who are socially or economically disadvantaged and create more mobility and create more inclusive and better functioning workplaces.
You have an interesting piece of research that examines helping behavior in the workplace, which has been recently published in the Academy of Management Journal. Can you tell us more?
Yes, so we noticed that during economic downturns, people actually at work in very many situations where they could help each other, where they could stand together, where they could be unified in resisting difficult times and helping the organization grow and recover, they actually become insulated and disconnected, and they are actually less likely to help each other. So we started with a large-scale study that tried to examine the psychology behind this kind of behavior during economic crisis. And what we found is that during economic downturns, because you read all these news about economy being in a difficult state and people losing jobs, and so what happens is that transforms psychology of individuals fundamentally. And instead of trying to help each other out, people start to think about success as an exclusive good, as something that is hard to obtain. And if one person obtains success, then it's less likely that they will succeed or that there's going to be success left available for other people. So basically what happens is we enter this mindset of scarcity and mindset of zero-sum success, and that in itself makes it less likely for people to help each other out to basically promote the success of your colleagues, which would translate into better performance of your teams, of your organization, and basically would help the organization withstand the recession. Actually, what happens is the exact opposite. People enter this scarcity mindset and they become less likely to help each other. So it's really the worst possible thing that you can do during a recession. Unfortunately, that's exactly what happens.
Could you elaborate on the studies and experiments which were conducted to arrive at these findings?
We started with a large-scale kind of pooled cross-sectional study where we examined responses from tens of thousands of people across the world, across many economies, across years, and we examined how their responses with regards to how they understand success, basically whether they see success as an exhaustible good, where if one person succeeds, there is not so much success left for other people, on the one hand, versus just seeing success as something that is available to everybody, seeing success as something that can grow and where everybody can be successful, where we can generate more wealth. This represents kind of the tendency of people to see success as a more or less zero-sum good. So we analyzed data from tens of thousands of people from various economies and many years to this response, and we examined how these questions, how people's beliefs vary as a function of the state of the economy. So what we found is that during more difficult economic times, when the economy is in a downturn, people actually start believing that success is something that not everybody can achieve, and if you allow the success of one person, there's less success left for others. So that is actually the mindset that leads them to become less helpful at work. So we then wanted to examine the specific consequence in subsequent studies. So we conducted another 3 studies among employees of various organizations, studies 2 and 3, and we also examined behavior of freelancers, again surveyed across the globe in study 4. So what we found across these studies is that this mindset of viewing success as a more zero-sum good actually undermines helping, even in situations that we constructed such that helping the other person by definition had no influence on one's own success, did not interfere with anybody else's success. So imagine a very simple situation at work where you can help your colleague, and this colleague's promotion or success wouldn't really exhaust the pool of bonuses or promotions, wouldn't make you less likely to get a promotion or a bonus. However, during recession, because you enter this state of mind where success is a more exhaustible good, people become less likely to help even in these kinds of situations. So this really shows that across studies, basically we found that this zero-sum mindset that people enter during recession, it really tears the social fabric of organizations, even in situations in which there is no interdependence and in which helping your colleagues wouldn't create any damage to yourself. In fact, it would just help the organization, it would just help the functioning of your team, and it would make your organization more profitable.
Could you tell us more about the methodology you adopted? Also, how long did this research project take?
The research we conducted took place over a year and a half, I believe. So we first analyzed these large-scale data. Most of that data set is publicly available, but it required very careful compilation, encoding, and merging of the data set, and then very careful, rigorous analysis. So we provide very many robustness checks, and these kinds of data can be very difficult to tackle, even just to compile. So that took several months of work. But then we wanted to really provide rigorous tests of these ideas because we are making very big statements. So we first designed a completely new way of testing how human psychology is shaped by macroeconomic changes. And we really surveyed the entire literature to see whether there is anything out there that will allow us to kind of provide these tests. And surprisingly, we found that in the literature, this methodological challenge of just studying how human psychology, individual level psychology, is impacted by macroeconomic changes, that actually created a divide in the literature where researchers look either at micro situational context, how people around you, how your incentives and things like that, how they shape your psychology, or looked at processes at the level of the economy. So basically, how industries work, how firms work within industries, and things like that. So basically, we don't really have a really strong paradigm for studying individual psychological responses to macroeconomic changes. So my co-author and I, we developed one particular methodology, which is we drew on psychological research on priming, and we devised manipulations where we literally told people, look, the economy is doing bad. And we created false articles from New York Times, and we asked people to read about the state of the economy. And we were clever in this regard in the sense that we only gave them truthful information about the economy, because at any given time there is contradictory information in the news as to whether the economy is doing well. Maybe the stock market is doing well, but the real estate market is not doing so well. So we just selectively presented truthful information to participants, and that in itself was enough to manipulate their perception of the state of the economy. After that, we just measured whether they're in a more or less zero-sum mindset, and what we found is that indeed reading that the economy is in a bad state puts you in a more zero-sum mindset, and then after that we observed the consequences for helping across a range of organizational situations. We saw that priming people with the notion that the economy is in a bad state puts them in a more zero-sum mindset, and then after that they would enter a situation in the organization where they have an opportunity to help a colleague, and doing so wouldn't really take away from their success, but because they're in this mindset, they actually are less likely to succeed. So these follow-up studies took another year of our work, and of course we had to go through the review process and address all the comments we received by the reviewers to make our analysis even more robust, to make our methodology even stronger, and that resulted in this, I believe, pretty strong four-study package that we have in the paper that I believe demonstrates with much internal and external validity the important implications of macroeconomic changes for human psychology and for the important outcome of workplace helping.
How can companies benefit from these findings? What are the implications for managers?
So the implications is, we know from past research that workplace helping is tremendously important. And organizations this is called contextual performance, because it complements your primary task performance in the sense that really organizations cannot thrive unless coworkers help each other out. It's impossible for organizations to mandate and kind of regulate every aspect of employee behavior. You really need to create collegial workplaces, and then even if an employee is missing for a day, your colleagues are going to fill you in, they're going to bring you up to speed. And in many cases, organizations actually rely for good performance on employee helping. Now, for that reason, it is particularly important that during recessions, managers maintain the level of helping that occurs among employees. So what we find is that this level of employee helping actually goes down. And because of that, our research really points to a very important process that is of interest to managers, but it also points to organizational actions that they can take in order to mitigate or kind of combat this process. So because the effect that we document comes from this mindset of seeing success as more zero-sum good, this is exactly something that managers can attack through corporate communication, through workshop, through kind of team-building exercises where they highlight that success is not a zero-sum good in situations in which it is not, and where they kind of change this mindset of employees and kind of make sure that employees during economic downturns don't actually start turning on each other and start kind of becoming insular and becoming less helpful. So first lesson from our research for managers is that this is something to anticipate. Oftentimes managers don't even anticipate that employee behavior might change during recessions. You might think that they might become concerned, maybe they're going to become better organizational members. What we find is that it transforms their psychology, they actually become worse organizational members. So the first lesson is really to anticipate that and to work with your workforce and with your employees to make sure that they are not in this zero-sum mindset mode, and to actually try to maintain or even boost employee helping during recessions.
From your observations, do these findings transcend geographical boundaries and cultures?
In two studies, we use American samples, and that was necessary because we constructed our manipulations such that they relied on actual information about the U.S. economy, so we used that to manipulate their perception of the state of the economy. But we were careful not to generalize and make general statements based only on U.S. samples. So in study one, which is the large-scale study, we actually have samples from across the world, including Asia, and what we see there is that the same effects obtain across the globe. So it doesn't seem to be specific to only Western samples. And then we also sought to replicate in another study across the globe with freelancers that we recruited for an online portal, and they came from a range of countries, from 50 countries actually, many of them including in Asia and in Southeast Asia. So we have freelancers who would be working in the Philippines or Indonesia or Malaysia. They would be working from their homes, and so we would measure their perception of the state of the economy, and what we see that this is correlated with a zero-sum mindset, such that the worse they perceive their local economy to be, the more they are in this generalized zero-sum mindset. And that actually, after that, we gave them the opportunity to help another freelancer, which was actually just a cover story. This other person did not really exist. And what we see is that being in an economy that was performing worse put people in a more zero-sum mindset, and actually that made them less likely to help this freelancer. Our findings are robust across the world. So basically our findings are very relevant both to managers in the East and the West. We observe these effects across the globe. So it seems to be a universal human response rather than something that's typical to any particular region in the world.
Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.